Hello and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, Planning for a Successful Start, Part 2. Today's session focuses on preparing for back to school during COVID-19 in high schools. I'm Jim Mooney, Deputy Director of NEASC, Commission on Independent Schools, and working with me today is Allison Geary, Deputy Director of the Commission on Public Schools at NEASC. We're excited that today's audience includes more than 700 educators and colleagues from the US and from 50 countries. We thank you for your participation in advance. As schools have recently reopened and are nearing their reopening dates, educators here in New England and around the world are working to implement the practical requirements of managing a safe and effective restart of school operations. However, coping with the reality of carrying on amid the volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous times in which we live is an equally complex challenge that can take on a much more personal toll. We're fortunate today to have assembled educators working in high schools who will share some of their thinking and planning with us in hopes of supporting all those listening and grappling with their own context with this question: how are we going to do this? Today's forum, like many past forums, will be recorded and made available on the NEASC website along with any resources provided during the broadcast. I will join you near the end of the webinar, but for now, I'm going to pass the conversation over to my co-host, Allison, who will start the introductions. Thank you again for being here.
Thank you, Jim. We're so excited today to have brought together this panel of educators to talk about how they're feeling and how they're preparing for this school year. We recognize that the situation around the world for schools is very fluid. Some schools are planning to open online, some face-to-face, and some with a hybrid model. Many schools find themselves with multiple plans that will be adjusted as circumstances change, and that's certainly the case for the schools, the teachers in the schools that we're going to talk to today. And that leaves teachers with this difficult task of how to plan for the start of the school year and beyond. And so today we'll be having a conversation with educators who teach learners from grades 9 through 12 in public, private, and international schools. So I'd like to start out by having our panelists introduce themselves, and they're going to tell us a little bit about their school context and also what type of learning they're going to be engaging in as they start school this fall. Davis, let's start with you, and then we'll have Jennifer and Cristina.
Thanks, Allison and Jim. Delighted to be here. My name is Davis Smith. I'm a doctor of internal medicine. I'm the director of health services at Westminster School in Simsbury, Connecticut, and I do some health education for the what we call the fourth form, the sophomore class. We are a co-ed boarding and day school with about 75% boarding students. We're situated in Connecticut, which is an advantage right now, obviously, in terms of SARS-CoV-2 activity. We plan to, starting tomorrow, bring back about 40% of our students to do an on-campus quarantine with distance learning starting August 28th. If that goes well, then September 11, 12, we'll bring back the balance of our students, and we hope to start in-person learning on the 14th of September. We've offered students the opportunity to do boarding, day, or distance learning as an option, but we do have a lot of students planning to come back to campus.
Terrific. Thanks, Davis. Jennifer?
Thanks, Allison. Hi, Jim. Thanks for having me. My name is Jennifer Field. I'm a science teacher and science department chair at Nipmuc Regional High School in Upton, Massachusetts. Our regional school hosts students from 2 towns. We have about 650 students. We'll be starting remote in 2 weeks. Fortunately, we were given the 2 weeks planning that the state of Massachusetts recommended, and we'll reevaluate our status in the middle of October with the potential of having hybrid learning starting then, although all our students have the option of being totally remote for the year.
Okay, great, thanks. Cristina?
Good morning, all. It's good to be here. And my name is Cristina Hernandez. I am an English language arts teacher and an English as a second language teacher at the English High School, a public high school in Boston, Massachusetts. We have about 600 students from all over cities and towns in Boston. And at this moment, we are going to be starting fully remote starting in September 21st. And from there, our district will be phasing in students based on grade levels and also needs. For high school, students will be coming into a hybrid model starting November 16th and November 19th for the different groups that will be coming in. At the moment, currently, teachers do have to report to school, physically be there, even if students will not be physically there. So we'll see what happens.
Terrific. Thank you. Ani?
Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good evening. My name is Ani Candelario Escobar. I am a residential dean at Phillips Academy, Andover. I'm also a mathematics instructor. Phillips Academy is a residential day and boarding school. We're about 74% residential. This fall, however, we will look slightly different. We have invited our 9th and 12th graders. We have given all of our boarders and day students the options to be solely remote, but have made the conscious choice to de-densify the campus by only inviting 9th and 12th grade boarders. That means that we will start the fall with 40% of our boarding population on campus, and we will stagger the day student population. One note is that there are students who are not in 9th and 12th grades that have identified themselves as needing to be on campus, and we have been able to honor that need.
Terrific. Thank you. Cheryl?
Hi, my name is Cheryl Hickman, and I'm a science teacher and PLC coordinator at the International School of Belgrade in Serbia. And we have students from pre-K all the way through 12th grade on 2 separate campuses, one for primary and one for secondary. And we started back this week. We just finished our second day. We are full in-person learning full-time for all students. Although we are running a hybrid model, we did give students the option of staying home and learning through the virtual environment. But the vast majority of our students are back on campus.
Terrific. Jeetan?
Hi, everybody. I am from India, Bangalore. We are an international school with more than 650 plus students. Currently, our students are every single continent, and we are trying to run an online virtual school for 12 different time zones, and it's a pretty interesting way to run it. I also recovered from COVID recently, so I've seen it up close and personal. We do not intend to go on campus until the end of December, and waiting for the Ministry of Health and Human Resources to let us know how the onboarding of students are going to be. We are a day-come boarding school.
Great. Yeah, we just learned that Jeetan just recovered from COVID, so that's we appreciate him being here to talk about it. So one of the questions that we wanted to start with was, how are you preparing differently for this year than you have for previous years? What does it look like? Cristina, do you want to start?
Sure. It's interesting with the question because when I think about this question, there's actually some things that I still feel that we need to prepare for, as always, in terms of the essence of pedagogy. So just trying to remind myself of like some of the things that I learned when I first started teaching. This is my 5th year as a teacher, and I think for this year, just being much more explicit with all the things that we usually do as teachers to prepare. So just being mentally aware, especially for the needs of our students. I think I noticed that someone asked in Q&A about the psychological needs for our kids, and just being emotionally aware, being compassionate, which is something that we as teachers always do, but just really being explicit and remembering those things because of the different needs of our students. So like we have students from all over and different needs and different things that they're going to be needing during this time, and questions that are still waiting to be answered. I think also one thing, just as teachers in general, we need to be empathetic with ourselves. And that's something that, as I've mentioned, like, that's always just a foundation for teaching, and just empathetic with ourselves. I remember reading something the other day about someone asking students to be kind to their teachers, because there's this gentleman who's older and learning how to use technology. And it can get overwhelming. And teaching is teaching is a lifestyle where you give of yourself. And now with this added aspect of virtual or hybrid models, or worrying about the safety of students, we're gonna need like 125% more, or even more than that. But I will say that if there is something that's like very explicitly different, is just also, I've been looking at different resources, especially technology-wise. So there are some things that last year I would have planned in my lessons and my units for activities and different ways to engage my students. This year I have to think about how can I still get some of those goals out there and the outcomes in terms of the skills and our objectives, but how will I deliver that to the students virtually? So some of the things, for example, and this is like as a whole school at the English High School, we've talked about different tools and things that we can use. So some things are like Padlet, instead of doing like a gallery walk, maybe where I have students walk around the classroom. They can't walk around the classroom, but maybe using Padlet for them to share their ideas, and other students feed off of each other's ideas. And that's something that's attainable virtually. Other resources where I would have students annotate in the classroom on a text. You know, we can't do that, but now with you know, Google Classroom, maybe having specific documents for students and having them comment, having their own copies for those things. So I think I would say, if there's anything, two things that I would say for preparing for this year is remembering the foundations of teaching and what makes us teachers, and being much more intentional about that and explicit with that. Mm-hmm. And then also being open-minded and looking for resources and tools that will help us to really deliver things through technology. And just, you know, one of the things as teachers, just making sure that the things that we're sharing are engaging, especially for such a time as this.
Yeah. I think one of the interesting things is, you know, in March, you knew your students, everyone had met their students, you had some kind of a community, and now you're getting a whole new group of students. Jennifer, how have you thought about that, and how are you preparing, and how do you think you'll get to know these students when you're meeting them for the first time online?
That's a great question, and my colleagues and I have really been talking a lot about that. I do teach 9th grade students, and they would be new to the building anyway. I think, again, like Cristina said, to be really deliberate about the process and to incorporate social emotional learning in our lessons daily, and just to be really purposeful about that, to get to know students on a one-to-one basis, hopefully through small pull-out rooms in Zoom, or one-to-one meetings, office hours, really having kids like explain who they are, what their interests are, you know, do they have siblings, do they have pets, that kind of thing, maybe videos, or, you know, drawings, or some kind of real personal way that the students can tell us who they are, where they're coming from, and, you know, what they're hoping for this year.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you. Jitan, do you have some ideas about that or thoughts about that?
I think building on Christina's point, as a teacher, I realized that sometimes I'm working for 14 hours a day because I have sort of blurred the boundary of school and home. So I think first and foremost, in order to create a very happy classroom, you need to take care of your own mental health. So make sure you have like a dedicated space for work, and you sort of have a balanced lifestyle. I think that's one of the most important things. The other thing, we have been in school for 2 weeks, and one of the things that really worked with students, I teach 2 classes of visual art. and that is setting up routines and systems. There's a new vocabulary now that the students need to use. They have never heard of the word synchronous and asynchronous, and we are going to be editing it online, or let's do a Zoom call. Like 6 months back, I had not heard of Zoom. So in terms of making sure that, like our kids understand systems and procedures, like the way I would do it in a physical classroom, like this is what we do in every single class, setting that up, and also finding hacks. You don't want your emails to be bombarded, and I think emails would require you time to send replies to students and parents. So one of the things that I have sort of devised is using video lessons, because the students can play them multiple times, so they don't really have to write to you, I did not really understand and what's going on. So I think these small little things, taking care of your mental health, setting up routines, letting the kids know that you are available to them, and sometimes recording lessons online. Now there are complications around child protections and policies and procedures schools might have, but making it available to students who are doing the lesson asynchronously is also a pretty important system. As a school leader, I also feel it's important to take care of the well-being of teachers. Just ask them once in a while, how are you? What's going on? Do you need something? Can I be of help? I think that's very important, where we belong to a community, and the community is ready to stand up for each other. So I think that's pretty important as we begin this new school year.
Yeah. So Cheryl, you're in person, but I'm assuming you've made some adjustments as well for your teaching this year. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so our school community decided that the safest thing for our students was to create a learning bubble. And that's a new word that we're all learning, right? So our grade levels are remaining together in a certain section of the school, and they are not leaving their groups, and are not leaving their physical space, and their teachers are traveling to them, which is something as a high school teacher, we don't have a lot of practice in, particularly specialized teachers, science teachers, arts teachers, etc. This is a very new way of teaching. And so it required a lot of planning to think about, what do students need from a learning space? And it's a kind of thinking that we haven't had to do as teachers in such a purposeful way for many of us for a really long time. So instead of spending time preparing my classroom with all of my word walls and all of my materials, we were more looking at how do we encourage and how do we empower students to become a part of the learning environment, so that they can tell us what they need from the furniture and from the space in order to get that essential learning done. So it's been a huge paradigm shift in how we think about what a learning space is. And we also have virtual student platforms. So we have in every classroom big TV monitors and microphones and cameras, and I'm talking to you on one of those now. So there's also the consideration of how do we, make a learning space usable for both at home and in-person students. But it is definitely a big shift in thinking for teachers in terms of, what role we let the students play in that process.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that idea of those pods. So Davis and Ani, you both have sort of, as you look at your roles in terms of the boarding space and in terms of getting ready for school, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the, Ani, we'll start with you, some of the safety precautions you put in place, some of the ways that you've started to get ready for the school year, and then Davis will have you chime in as well.
And thanks, most definitely. I think, Cheryl, to your word of bubble, up here we've heard pods and clusters and groupings and families. And that's how we're approaching cohorts of students, particularly in our residential setting. To Christina's points and everyone's point on here, one of the things we most need to do is to be very explicit with our communications, with our expectations, with our safety protocol. To that in mind, all of our students have signed what we're calling a non-SIBI pledge, which is basically ensuring that they understand the need for safety protocols, given the fact that they will be living in close proximity with their pods or their families, groups of students. So we've needed to establish explicit guidelines around meals, restroom use, common room use, traffic patterns in and out of dormitories. We'll be quarantining for the first 2 weeks. And so allowing them to be comfortable with checking their symptoms every day on an app that the school has developed, really focusing with them on how can they keep themselves and the community safe. I do think that a lot of what they will learn in the dorms will need to transfer over to the classrooms. But not only that, they'll be taking a lot of their classes at home in their rooms. So for a remote population, they'll be at home in their bedrooms. But here for our boarding students, it'll be very different. It'll be very strange. You'll be in your dorm room and taking classes online. And so once again, I think, to the point of our teachers putting themselves first and taking care of themselves in order to take care of our students, our dorm parents, our house counselors who will be living with our students 24/7 are amazing and have all decided that that is something that they will take on. Our school has given the option to our faculty to either opt for in-person or remote. So I'm quite confident that those that have chosen to be in person in the dorms are also aware of the need for them to be explicit with their instruction. And not only that, but also to provide these students with comfort, with a way in which they can express their concerns and their worries, as I do not think this fall will be easy on anyone. But in our role, we strive to provide, we cater to the needs of our students, and their mental health and emotional needs are going to be a top priority for us. So yes, our classrooms are important, and getting them to understand content and all these different digital platforms that we have been exploring nonstop are very important.
Yeah.
And we cannot forget that these are kids, our children, trying to move through a global crisis, pandemic. And I feel really fortunate to be able to facilitate those thoughts and feelings that our kids will have on multiple levels and all over, with different kind of backgrounds and understandings and things that are happening in the world right now.
That's great. And I think that's such a positive perspective on such a difficult time. I really appreciate that. Just to think about, that we're all going through this as adults, but we're also, we are trying to be there for the children that are experiencing as much or more stress than as we are, in terms of thinking about this and the way that it's changing their lives. I mean, they have an expectation of what their high school years are going to look like, and all of a sudden it's totally different. Davis, do you want to give us some perspective of what you've done on your campus to make parents, students, and teachers feel safe?
Sure, thank you. And certainly I can echo a lot of what's been said, in particular, Amy Patel, who's the Director of Health Services at Andover, is a close colleague. We've worked together on some of our planning organizer. We speak at least once a week. So there are a lot of pieces that resonate. I think that the sort of a thing that I'd add to this is we've been working since late spring, and I would say that we've rebuilt the school from the ground up, right? We sort of reimagined how to practice school in the setting of a global pandemic, and an objective has been building in foundations of safety and preparedness. So we push this notion of the 4 pillars of prevention. So that's maximize masking, maximize distancing, maximize hygiene, minimize mixing. And we just have repeated this concept over and over because testing is helpful, but prevention is better. And so we really, really are focusing on a perspective of prevention for everybody's well-being. And our process started with a small group, but very quickly we started to involve other faculty members, staff members, et cetera. And I'll say that while I think our plan is very good and very important, I think our process is even more important than our plan. And I would think that most of you would agree that the new ways that we've had to come together and reimagine how to do school in this environment has really developed some communication patterns, some structures for managing both how we talk to each other and then how we communicate outwardly. And I think that that process is really the greatest strength that we bring to the start of school, because as good as as I believe our plan is, we haven't prepared for every possible eventuality. But we have these structures in place now where I think we can very quickly respond to places where our plan didn't anticipate something or is working imperfectly or whatever. And I think that that's a real strength. Yeah, so I'll pause there.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions on the Q&A that some of our participants said they would answer live. So Cristina, do you want to answer the question? The question came up, how are the school buildings safe for teachers and staff, but not for students? And I know you said that in Boston, they actually have a plan to have teachers come in, even if the students are not there. Do you want to speak to that briefly?
Yes, I thank you, Allison. I just wanted to share real quick about that. Interestingly enough, I don't think that the buildings are safe for teachers. And that's kind of just the feedback that we're getting overall in Boston. One of the plans, or part of the plan that was presented from the district included certain things for, safety, hygiene, all of these little different aspects that we need in order to try to keep everyone safe. However, the argument is being made by teachers that we don't see necessarily how these things are going to be accomplished if after years and years we've been asking for some of these things to be done and it hasn't been done. So how are we gonna, wave a magic wand and get it done quickly? It's so interesting because, with education, like we are teachers, leaders, deans, different roles that we represent here. But on a higher level, there are so many things that some of our school systems really need to work on. And again, I teach in the public school system for Boston Public School System. Our school, the English High School, is the oldest public school in the United States of America. And with that being said, it's not that our school has always been in the same building. It's moved throughout the years, but our building is old. And many of the facilities for a lot of our schools in Boston are not up to code with what is needed for even simple things just as ventilation and other things that CDC and other things have presented of what is needed. So really to answer that question, the sentiment is that it is not, if it's not safe for our students, it's not necessarily safe for teachers. And so, as teachers, again, with that empathy and being compassionate with ourselves, we are being called to the forefront, to step up. And I think that it is important to be aware and to be open to adaptability. That's something that we always have to use in our craft as teachers, but even for ourselves personally, because a lot of us are, like the building is not safe. How can we have our kids in here and how can we be here? Yeah. I'm sure that there's teachers that have family members that have people who may be at risk. I was mentioning, I actually have rheumatoid arthritis and I'm type 1 diabetic. So my whole family would be like, you shouldn't be in the building. But there are other teachers that are in other positions. And so it's an issue that is still being worked out because we want to make sure that schools are safe for everyone and everyone is important in order to keep education moving forward and evolving and improving and being a true benefit and impact in the lives of students.
Yeah. And I think one of the things the pandemic has highlighted is just the inequities, right? I mean, you talk about, we have buildings that weren't safe before and now they're really not safe, right? So I think that's one of the things that that it has shown. There was another question about visitors. Jeetan, do you want to answer that? Someone asked, will you allow visitors to your campus?
Yeah, so we are an international school with around 60 acres of campus. So it's a huge campus to sort of monitor people movement. So as a part of our safety protocols, we have procedures put into place with lieu of visitors of what are we going to do in terms of different situations. So when COVID started and we had our first case reported in India, we sort of put in procedures in place, which included checking temperature, making sure that if some adult does not really need to go to the academic building, there's no need for them to go to the academic building. If I need to go and meet a vendor or someone who does not really need to go, I would go to the admin block and have a conversation with them there. So in terms of having procedures and policies to make sure that in terms of the safety of the students and teachers comes the first. Various countries are also putting up their own policies. Like one of the things that in India, it is mandatory for you to have an app that the government has launched called as Arogya Setu. So we have incorporated that in our policy. That means everybody arriving on the campus need to have that app, and it needs to show that they are safe and they have not really interacted with anyone from COVID. So that's another requirement that we have put in place. The sad part of the reality is that life has to go on. You cannot really sort of shut down systems, because how are you going to run the school without vendors or without other people or without, caretakers? So it's a reality. We need to work around it. And I think having policies and procedures, and as a lot of panelists said, consistent vocabulary and consistent message makes it easy for everyone involved to sort of be safe and safeguard each other.
Yeah, great. Thank you. We had a question that came in before the webinar. One of our participants was asking about virtual labs, and we have two science teachers with us, Jennifer and Cheryl. So Jennifer, do you want to talk a little bit about how you're going to handle labs, especially in these first 2 months when you're virtual?
Sure. I think we're going to do a few different things. My department and I have our eyes on several different things. One of our options is to give some of our smaller cohorts kits that they can use at home for simple basic labs. Another option definitely is virtual labs, finding sites that host labs where students can gather data and process the data. And then another option, because we are allowed to come back to school, is to do demos right from our classrooms and gather data with the students virtually. And I think that's probably something that we're definitely going to try before school starts in a couple of weeks, to see if that might be a better way. Then students can actually see us, they can see our classrooms, they can see us working, and have some input to the lab that's being done. I think you're muted, Allison.
Yeah, I am. You have the option of going into the building, but you don't have to be in the building. So It's nice to know that you can go in and do a lab, and that would be okay. Great. Yeah. Cheryl, what are your thoughts? I know you've got some students at home, so you're demonstrating at home and in the classroom.
Yeah, so it's crazy. And we're also not in our science labs, all of us. If a learning community or a learning bubble doesn't have a science lab in their location, we're bringing the science to them, but it looks a little bit different. To maintain safety protocols when you're not in a science lab requires a little bit more planning and consideration for sure. We're trying to train the kids that are at home to have in-person lab partners to try to replicate that experience in small groups where possible. We're also trying to do labs, especially for our younger kids, that they can do at home, right? So they can do them along with the class. So I think it really depends on grade level, and it depends on what you can do safely. How much safety equipment do you have? Does your high school have multiple sets of goggles that you can sterilize in between? How do we share safety equipment? How do we do science without, while distancing? So I think it's just taking a lot more planning, but I think it is increasingly important to have those experiences to maintain that sense of inquiry with tactile things when possible.
Great, thank you. Davis, there was a question about how to deal with cases on the school campus, and you wanted to address that live. Go ahead.
Sure, thank you. Everybody's environment and situation is a little bit different, but in our case, we also have a symptom self-checker app. We are requiring that everybody coming to campus, that by which I mean students, faculty, and staff, do that self-checker app every day. And the simple guidance is that if you don't get cleared for that day, which is basically if you indicate any symptom, we want you to stay put. We don't want you coming to campus and circulating around. Stay at home, stay in your dorm room, and then depending on who you are, in the case of students, get in touch with the health center. We will see those positive results come through, but we also are encouraging people, especially because, of course, they can develop symptoms over the course of the day. But it's really about not circulating if you develop symptoms. Now, the structure, all the changes that we've put in place are there to do two things. One is to prevent people getting SARS-CoV-2 infection, but also to prevent people from being close contacts. So there are very few people that would qualify as a close contact. In Connecticut, a close contact is defined as being within 6 feet or less for 15 minutes or more, irregardless of mask use. So that's the Connecticut definition. I think that's in most places. New Hampshire's is even more strict. I think they're 10 feet there. So the big thing is, if you don't feel right, if you have some new original symptom, please don't come to our community. Let's sort that out. Let's take time to sort that out. We have the distance learning in place. You're not going to miss school. It's nice to be able to be with your peers, but let's have this recognition of our role in helping support the well-being of the whole school community. And so that's the fundamental piece. How the details I could go into as well, but I think that not mixing, not coming to school is the most important part.
What will you do if you have a case on campus? We
will have a case on campus. There's no, I think that's the very first thing to say. And I've tried to say that all the time. We will have people that have positive tests. We will have positive cases. I mean, it's out there, it exists. And if it's an emergency when we do, I think that doesn't indicate maybe full confidence in the protective measures that you've put in place. We will have cases. We don't want to, but we will. And so in our setting, we have asked all families to make a commitment to be able to come and collect their student from campus within a short amount of time. So we have a health center, we have kind of COVID safe spaces, but the families are going to come and they're going to take the student home until the completion of their time of isolation. We have plans for quarantining close contacts. Families may choose to take their students home to quarantine close contacts, but those are the main points.
Great, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Ani, there was a question about how you're going to take care of the mental health of staff and students staying in the residential campus. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? If you've had some thoughts about how do you ensure or support the mental health of those that are on campus, the staff and the students?
Yep, most definitely. And I just want to say that, Davis, our plans at Andover are quite similar to yours. If there is, which there will be a positive case, we have a 24-hour window where we've asked parents to, if it's a boarder, pick up their child and take them home, or give us information as to who will be able to come and provide support for that child. So I think it's important to note that for our students that are arriving on campus and those remotely at home, COVID-19 is one aspect of, I don't want to call it a distraction, but something that is being pushed on them that they are experiencing. That's one thing. Our students at home and also on our boarding school campuses are coming and entering our community with so many different other concerns. Many of them might be exacerbated by COVID. Maybe their parents are unemployed. Maybe there's an illness in the family. They've been indirectly or directly affected by the virus, yes. I think perhaps the socioeconomic situation of their families have changed. I don't think that I can be on this Zoom and talk about mental health and not share the anti-Black racism climate that many of our students are experiencing as well. I also think that a lot of our international students will have difficulty just with travels and visas and being stopped from actually being a part of our community. So all of these elements are things that we need to be prepared for as, and I want to focus on house counselors or dorm parents, people who actually live with the students, and providing opportunities for conversations and discussions and affinity spaces in which they can actually feel more of a connection and support. We are very fortunate to have great medical and psychological services available right on campus. But I do think, and I stress highly again, that connection is actually what will allow us to support our students in the way that they need. And by connection, it means like our empathy, our ability to think about ourselves and our biases, and, you know, kind of question ourselves, why are we feeling this way? And be able to talk about it, if not with the student, but with a trusted colleague. I think that as teachers, we always take on so much responsibilities for the experience of our students. This is no different, yet very different. Once again, as a residential dean, I see my role as helping my colleagues help the students, providing them with resources. How does one engage students that actually don't want to engage, that actually really are committed to online and they don't want to have these conversations? So talking about icebreakers, conversation prompts, communication with the students and parents. One of the things that we are doing is usually our students have multiple faculty that communicate with them and with their families back home. We're really being intentional with having one primary faculty on campus being the liaison with the student and family. Now, all of our faculty, all of our teachers will have access to the students will have access to all of our teachers and faculty.
Yeah.
But there will be one person solely responsible for having a bird's eye view, as well as a very granular relationship, and being able to have that with families. So I see this as an opportunity that we don't typically have or have had in the past. Yes, we have really good communications with parents, but I feel that the frequency of that communication will increase for the better. I feel that we will get to know our students and our families best that way. We are very much aware of our diverse student populations. We think about language and technology access and so many things that somehow we know exists, but don't really nail down details as to how can we best go about doing this. And so I feel this pandemic has provided us an opportunity to explore those connections and find ways in which perhaps we need to continue our good work or improve upon, or really start from scratch. So this has been a really great learning opportunity, and the mental health of our students, as well as their health, their safety, right? Physical health is definitely a top priority. It has to be. And I know that I'm focusing on students that we have on campus. And I want to say for the record that our remote students will need equally as much support, even while at home. Mind you that we have boarding students that have been with us now for 4 years, and perhaps we know them more than their parents know them.
Yeah.
So trying to find ways for the connections to exist, like that format. Anyway, I can go on and on about mental health. I do think that social emotional need of our students is a top priority given this these circumstances. And I implore everyone to have conversations, to be vulnerable, and to share with their colleagues situations that maybe they might need to replay in their heads as to, hey, how can I go about doing or having this type of conversation? But I'll stop there.
Yeah. I mean, I think, teachers are always called on to be empathetic, but even more, right, in this situation. And I think that that's something, and we hear it talked about so much, is that we expect so much from teachers in a normal time, and now we're expecting even more. And I think about, your own personal and professional sort of responsibilities. And I think Jeetan talked about that in terms of working 14 hours a day, and where does it stop? Do you want to share a little bit personally about how you're sort of finding that balance? Jeetan, let's start with you in terms of finding that balance of being able to feel good about where you are just as a human being in this really difficult time.
I think one of the things, the internet has written it quite often on different blogs, and have a separate space for your work and where you're working from, and then like your other areas. I think that makes a lot of sense. Just the simple act of shutting down your laptop, I think that also gives you a lot of mental peace. And then realizing that if you're not recharged for the next day, like last night I was replying like emails till 2 in the morning because I was not able to sleep. Because a lot of my students and teachers are across Europe. So realizing that, yes, it's really good that I'm able to answer them immediately, but if I don't really recharge, tomorrow I won't be able to function really well. So that's pretty important. Building on Amy's point, it's important, to take care of mental health of everyone, and not just simply students and teachers, but parents. Like all of a sudden, they're also expected to be teachers, right? Like do everything with the kids. So I think it's important to tap in resources. The world has also seen the benevolence of some of the top professionals in the world, people like Bean Brown and David Kessler. They do free Zoom for talking about, grief and mental health. So I think also making this available to the community, I think totally makes a lot of sense. And it's also talk to each other. Like, I'm sure that we all have that colleague who we can call up and just say, I'm tired, right, of those emails. Can it stop? And just like letting it go makes a lot of difference.
Yeah. Thank you. Jennifer, do you have thoughts on that? I didn't ask any of you beforehand if you have children, but some of you may have your own children that you're trying to deal with along with that. Jennifer?
Sure, I agree with Jeetan, and making a separate place for your work. And I'm really fortunate in that I do feel safe in my school building, and I think I'm really going to use that as my workspace. Just to really make that separation. I know that in the spring it was really hard for me, answering emails at 7, 8 o'clock at night from students who I thought really needed that support, and really losing my family. In that, I have 2 grown children, but who were home because of COVID, and not getting time to spend with my family. So I really think that separating it out, scheduling time for yourself as an individual, at this time of the day, I don't have classes, so I'm going to take a walk. And this is my 1 hour. I need to, put my phone down, turn my phone off, take my computer, shut it down, and do what I need to do for mental health. Because I think that this year, every year that's important, but I think this year it's going to be extremely important. And with remote learning and all this digital communication, we're really going to need to take time and step away from our devices and actually just be ourselves for a while.
Great. Cheryl?
Yeah, so one of the things that's taken some immediate pressure off is we're not running any after school activities in these first 3 weeks, which is it's a big worry for me in terms of student development, but as a teacher, it's been really helpful to be able to concentrate on some other things immediately. And we've also been a lot more intentional about how we're planning home learning. So really taking a look at only the absolute most dire cases of home learning, and scaling that back, not only for us as teachers not having to provide as much support outside of that school hour time, but also for the kids and the parents, because we do know that it's adding stress. And then just reiterating and sharing with our leadership. Our leadership has been really quick to embrace this idea of service leadership and trying to take as much on as they can to, be respectful of teacher time. They're taking a lot more break duties and other things that you wouldn't typically see. So that's much appreciated. And I think it's all just in an effort to build a sense of school community, to be able to say to your colleague, to your supervisor, to your students that I'm really struggling with this aspect of my personal or professional life. And I'm not asking for a solution. I'm just asking for an empathetic ear. And so modeling that as adults, I think will help us with students. And yeah, taking the lessons that we learned from remote learning and trying to keep on that wellness track now that we're back in person.
Yeah. One of the ideas that we are hoping to do in a future webinar is to talk to school leaders about how this pandemic has changed their role and what they've learned through going through it. And I think what you talk about in the servant leadership and just, how can they jump in and lend a hand is really, really important. Cristina, did you have any thoughts you want to share on that topic?
Sure. Two things. So personally for myself, especially how to balance professional versus personal life. I agree with a lot of things that some of the panelists have shared here in terms of being intentional about your space, setting time aside. Personally for myself, I'm actually, my faith is really important for me and helps me stay focused and stay positive. And I'm actually a Sabbath keeper. So like, there's a specific time in the time that I don't do any work. And so I know like, okay, I'm not doing any work. Now, if a student needs something, that's totally different for me. But I've set aside that time like, no, this is my Sabbath, like I'm not gonna do any work here. And I think also one of the things that Cheryl was mentioning was just also setting up that community aspect as well. And, you know, the lines get blurred a little as teachers. Everyone here has mentioned something where it really lends to that point where we are doing so many things. But I think also for maybe if there are any teachers or leaders out there that find recharge in doing something that they are passionate about, I would also say finding a way to incorporate that into how then to also make this part of the school year better for our students and for ourselves as a community. And so I say that I love to sing and things, and I started choir at our school 2 years ago. And so one of the things I've been thinking about is how am I going to do choir this year? But I also know that it's going to be important for some of those kids that will need that outlet. And for me, it's something that I am passionate about. So I know for myself, okay, I am going to be down to be able to try to manage that. However, and just to be open to failure, to mistakes with that, because, you know, there's so many things that can change. And even in terms of that passion, building up community, like using some of the skills and things that we might be passionate about in our personal lives, and even trying to incorporate that into something that might give back to our community, whether it might be something encouraging or something motivation or some kind of different aspect, and being able to help that too. I like what Cheryl said about that servant leadership. You know, as teachers, leaders, when we give of ourselves, we usually receive back too. So just keeping those things in mind are important.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I think those personal outlets are really important for teachers. So we're getting close to our time, but we'll go a couple minutes over. I just want to ask this last question that I think is important, this sort of big picture question, which is how might this global pandemic create opportunities for education to adapt and transform for the future? And I know you're all sort of in different roles on that in terms of thinking about that, but have you thought about, you know, what's going to be different after this when we, you know, hopefully get a vaccine soon and we're able to move past this? What's going to be different for you as a teacher, and what do you think might be different for education? We'll try to keep these responses kind of short, succinct, but have you thought about that? And if you haven't, maybe think about it. Go ahead and whoever wants to go first. Jeetan.
I think our approach towards assessment will change forever. We don't really need to assess students. Like, an assessment is the students able to demonstrate that. So we don't really need to obsess for hours and hours over exam. Like this year, the IB did not conduct exam because it believed that the exam is not that important. So in terms of relooking at how we assess students, that's going to be a forever change. I think the pandemic is going to leave us with.
Yeah, and we didn't talk about assessment, but I mean, that's a whole issue of how do you assess and how do you know what students know? But thank you for sharing that. Jennifer?
Yeah, I'm actually really excited about looking at my curriculum differently. So, you know, I've been teaching for 18 years, and you always have these things that you do. Oh yeah, it's time for this unit. We're going to do a project or something. I don't have to think like that anymore. I can say, oh, look at a teacher who might be teaching the same thing. We could have a class together. We could have a class Zoom. I could call in a professional. They could Zoom with us. We really don't have to look at education the same way anymore. We can make it more student focused, student driven, and more global or community oriented. And I'm really excited about that.
Awesome. Who wants to go next? Go ahead, Cheryl.
Yeah, so I think we're all going to have students that are learning in a variety of physical spaces, mental spaces. They have different gaps in their learning from last year. So I think we're just going to see a big shift in personalized learning and really making everything tailored to each student in their own scenario and making those fluid. So whereas before we were planning as singular teachers for a whole group of students, now we're planning as a collaborative teacher team for each individual student. And I think that's going to be a great shift for education.
Yeah, thank you. We didn't get to that question, which is how do you address those gaps in learning? Because we know there's been gaps over the past 6 months or so. And so that personalization is really important. Ani?
Yeah, I wanted to agree with Cheryl in terms of the idea of this being catered to kind of almost individual learning styles, which I know many of our public schools, that's kind of what they do. So Cristina, that's a shout out to you and Jennifer. At the same time, I think that for me in the math classroom and doing a lot of flipped classroom, and I recall needing to teach our students how to study. How do you search for material? How do you know if you have gained mastery of such material? Or how do you test yourself? How do you test your knowledge? And so for me, I feel like I have been developing really great academic scholars in that they are very much needing to be paced as like, this is actually what reading your textbook is, and this is what highlighting is. I feel like it's almost a little bit of old school tied in with the new digital literacy that occurs. So how do I old school these skill sets to this digital platform? And I thought that was really interesting, and literally spent a week in teaching our kids how to navigate through a textbook. How do you test your knowledge, covering up the answers and working backwards. And it was really amazing to see students who might not have felt comfortable with a material being like, oh, I can problem solve this. I think I know how to do that. And so that's a skill set that they will take outside of the math classroom and apply it to English, to science, to life.
Yeah.
And so that has been really great to see, tied in now with this digital literacy where I have also been learning tons.
Sure.
I don't know, kudos to our kids, as I think they put in the work with our guidance, and they're going to have to continue to do that.
Yeah, I mean, we're definitely creating more independent learners, right? They have to be independent because they're on their own at home. So, and it's interesting, I think on a previous webinar, we talked with teachers and they said, there are some students who are really thriving in this environment, that the digital environment is better for them because they have more opportunities to express themselves. And so we look for those silver linings. Davis, do you have thoughts about how this might change the campus or how you do things, your job?
I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I'll try to be concise. I think a big piece is we discover when we face these kind of major challenges just what we're capable of. And I think that we have actually bigger issues to solve as a country, as a campus. And I'm thinking about the Black Lives Matter issues, diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I think that we're going to learn, especially if the more successful we are, the more we learn about what it takes to take care of each other. And in some ways, some ideas that aren't, and sorry to be a Merocentric here, but to be, not so individualistically minded, not so focused on ourselves, but to think about the health of the community. It's almost a more Native American idea as an extension of the health of ourselves, or we can't be healthy without our community being healthy. And I think that really speaks to where we need to be from a diversity, equity, inclusion perspective. I think we have a lot of work to do. I have a lot of work to do. But I think that this shows us really what we can be capable of.
Thank you. Yeah, that's so important that we rely on each other. And Cristina, last word. How do you think this will change education?
I'm in agreement with a lot of things that everyone has shared, student-driven, digital literacy, and just looking at the different issues and things. I think what I will add as well is really pushing our students to be deep thinkers, to ask the questions that are begging to be asked. And that's actually an approach that we're taking overall at the English High School. Just as you mentioned, Allison, like, you know, we do have a lot of independent learners now, you know, and so how do you manage everything that is being thrown at you? And so just as teachers being conscious of that and then helping our students navigate that. And I think also just in terms of curriculum, how do we look at our curriculum and make sure that it is something that is applicable, that it holds our students, accountable as well. So for example, for the English department at our school for this year, we've incorporated 2 new courses. One is the Voices of Migration, and looking at some of the things that are happening in our country, and also a racial justice class as well. So it's the first time that we're teaching something like that. But to Davis's point, our country continues developing and forming and things, and our students are not the leaders of tomorrow, they are the leaders of today. And so, you know, just as educators and as leaders, how do we help them prepare themselves and be, as Davis mentioned, be, you know, open to how to support each other as a village, and how to be aware and be thoughtful, critical thinkers for themselves.
Great, thank you so much. I could sit and talk to you guys all day. You're such an interesting group of people and just individuals. I've just enjoyed this so much, but I think we will go ahead and wrap up and just again say thank you so much for sharing your perspectives, and we want to thank the audience for joining in. Jim, if you're ready, we'll turn it back over to you. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a remarkable session. Thank you all. You've given us an awful lot to think about, and the comments that are flying through on chat and the questions all reflect exactly what Allison just shared. Thank you all on the outside for listening in and for contributing all the questions, sharing your thoughts with us today. This is, as Allison mentioned, a conversation that needs to keep going. We realize that we didn't cover everything, and we are promoting that we continue to share information. It's, I think, as someone said earlier in the webinar, it's in the community of colleagues that we're going to find the strength to move ahead. Continue the conversations on Twitter. You can use the hashtag NEASC Forum to check in on the website for recording of this session as well, and to see more about upcoming topics and registration information. So for all of the panelists, for Allison and everyone at NEASC, and Selena behind the scenes, I'm Jim Mooney. Thank you very much and have a good day.